Thank you very much, Professor Paul and Professor Wang, and thank you all for coming. Good morning. First, I want to thank the organizing committee for inviting me. It's really my pleasure and a privilege to speak to you here, to talk to you about atomic layer, two-dimensional nanoelectromechanical systems. As you can see here from a gallery of selected device pictures, we take atomic layers, isolate atomic layers from layered semiconductors, basic layered materials of crystals beyond graphene, to make structures, nanostructures, and devices which have both electronic and mechanical degrees of freedom that we can manipulate them. Some of them can also be probed by optical means like laser, fiber. So I share with you our effort in this direction. Because this topic might be a little bit unfamiliar to this community, so the earlier part will be slow. I'll try to go slow and give you a sufficient introduction. And the later part, we will try to speed up to give you a few case studies. If we don't have enough time, we can cut off one of the case studies. So the take-home message from this talk is actually simple. So in the past few years, we have made a lot of effort trying to develop this nanoscale electromechanical or electro-optomechanical device platform. As you can see, showing this color-enhanced scattering electron micrograph. So we have this blue-colored silicon oxide region, and we have patterned 6 here electrodes by conventional photo and combined electron beam lithography. And then we have also made atomic layer semiconductors onto this device, onto this substrate, and you can see they're connected. So you can immediately see there are multiple transistors here because we are talking about semiconductor crystal now with source and drain electrodes. And then we also have a backgate underneath the silicon oxide. So that makes immediately a number of transistor device. And then this circle part is hollow because there's a cavity there. So it could be an optical device and also mechanical device. So within this platform, we have developed 2D transistors with movable or resonant channel. And we can later show you that the vibrations of this suspended channel part can assume multiple resonance modes. And you can see the mode shape. This is the first mode. This is the second mode. These are experimentally measured or imaged vibrational mode shapes. So, and in this platform, we have also integrated the electronic readout, basically IV curve. You can measure transistor, and you can also interrogate the transistor at radio frequency and microwave frequency. You can do frequency modulation. Also, this cavity, if we engineer the bottom surface to be very smooth, we can make cavity for optical probing excitation. So this is pretty much compatible with today's 2D electronics and 2D optoelectronics. All we have done so far is to add what we are best at, mechanics, because in this community, to make moving parts in our systems is in our gene. So we must make things movable. And we can also use this platform toward the studies. So we have made static string measurement. We can vibrate the channel up to a microwave radio frequency. And then we do the electromechanical coupling. We have spatially resolved multi-mode, and we can engineer the shape, the asymmetry to engineer the multi-mode properties. And we are also exploring the optomechanical coupling in such structures. So why were we interested in looking into atomic layer semiconductors or atomic layer crystals beyond graphene? Because graphene was a forerunner, but graphene does not have a band gap. So in this beyond graphene semiconducting crystals, the interesting thing we want to remind you here is they are layered 2D materials. So for example, the forerunner of this beyond graphene semiconductor is actually molybdenum disulfide. And you can see the bulk crystal is here, and the atomic structure is showing here, and each layer looks like this. So here the sphere, the black, is the molybdenum, and the golden colored is sulfide. So these are just the representative member of this family called transition metal dicotogonide. So their electrical properties are attractive because for monolayer, molybdensulfide, it has a direct band gap of close to 1.9 eV. So this is different than graphene. So they immediately enable the first transistors actually have huge on-off ratio, as you know. For graphene, you can make transistors with on-off ratio from 10 to a few hundred. That's already very good. And this semiconductor can enable on-off ratio at room temperature 10 to the 6, 10 to the 8 easily. And so that gives you a good transistor. Electron mobility, they're coming short compared to graphene, but recent experiments have shown that their intrinsic mobility, if not limited by scattering of defects, are actually very high, approaching to graphene. So, but that requires challenging device fabrication to assume that intrinsically high electron mobility. So anyway, and optical properties, also very interesting because you can see actually its first material was, this is a material that was first discovered by optical physicists because they use photoluminescence to probe, and this material has very clear photoluminescence signatures. At the monolayer, so it's this curve, and the bilayer, the band gap changed from a direct band gap to indirect band gap. And so the band gap then depends, the band structure actually also depends on number of layers. And later, researchers in the community found that the band structure also depends on the mechanical string. So the property can be tuned by mechanical string continuously. Okay, so that's just one example, one material from this transition metal dicotogonide family. So I use this diagram to quickly summarize the interesting properties here. So they have very interesting electrical, optical properties and molecular structure properties. And for this community and for myself, it's very interesting to look at and try to explore and exploit their mechanical properties. First, the mechanical properties, just to have a short list, they're graphene-like. So they're very flexible because it's a membrane, like the kitchen membrane you cover your dishes. So it can be very highly stretchable, and it's ultimately low mass, ultimately high aspect ratio, with huge strain limit, 20% to 45%. They also have intriguing piezoelectricity intrinsic to some of the crystals if they break the crystal symmetry. They also have very interesting thermoelectric properties. Okay, so just zooming into that mechanical property, it's actually very striking if I plot the break-in strength normalized to the material's Young's modulus. So the blue dots are conventional MEMS and NEMS materials, ranging from silicon carbide to metallic material like titanium nitride. And the red ones are this atomic layer 2D structures. You can see their break-in string normalized to crystal Young's modulus is orders of magnitude higher. And I use this membrane cartoon. This is based on theoretical calculation. It can show that from the Brownian motion, undriven motion of the structure, which is at picometer level, to the onset of nonlinearity where the vibration will bifurcate, which is at nanometer, and then all the way to the breaking of this crystal membrane up to 20 or 30% of strain, the hundreds of nanometers. So these are different than conventional materials you can get in conventional materials. So we are talking about a dynamic range, mechanical domain dynamic range, in a small amplitude regime about 70. Actually, some devices we measured close to 100 dB. And then beyond that, till the material breaks, another 40 to 50 dB dynamic range. So those are available, but not yet explored experimentally. So those are very interesting regimes of operating such materials and devices. And in the past few years, we have demonstrated a physical sort of applied physics engineering system to allow us to probe this type of structures in this mechanically coupled 2D electronics, optoelectronics device platform. So we can see, you can see we have built a home-built interferometry system that allow us to measure the very small motion of the device. The displacement sensitivity we now have all the way down to Brownian motion, so we can read a multimode undriven Brownian motion of the mechanical structure at room temperature. And then integrated into this system is a Raman system. Why do we need Raman? Raman is actually a special requirement for atomic layer 2D materials, because you don't usually need Raman to do silicon optical MEMS, because but because silicon is well known. For 2D materials, because they have this signature, depends on number of layers, Raman become a necessity that we need to use Raman photoluminescence to probe the material to understand, okay, are we looking at a device which is a monolayer semiconductor, or it's a three-layer semiconductor? Then they will have different mass, different spring constant, and different optical properties and semiconducting properties. And we also build this structure that can allow us to do coupled electro and optical measurement. So this is a summary of the topics, actually, because my group is formed of a bunch of applied physicists and excellent engineering students. So we have been trying to merge these two areas to do something. So for fundamental device physics, we have looked at the dissipations, Brownian motion, feedback cooling, nonlinearity in the nanoelectromechanical resonators. Toward very growing, very rudimentary application aspects, we have been looking at pressure sensing, temperature coefficient, and then temperature compensation to make initially very sensitive, thermally very sensitive 2D devices to be thermally insensitive, depending on different needs. And also, we also have made flexible NEMS devices, stretchable, highly stretchable PDMS substrate. This work was reported last year in MEMS conference. So how do we make this type of structures? So quickly go through the device fabrication processes. So early days, like everybody else, we were using mechanical exfoliation. So this was developed by Professor Novoselov when he was discovering graphene, which led to his Nobel Prize. And so we use a similar process. So we extract few layer and monolayer to the atomic layers semiconductor from the bulk, because the bulk of the layered material have this layers stacking, so they're like books. So basically, to isolate a few pages from a book. So that's the process. And then we place the tape down there. You can see this is a typical device we made in early days, 2012, I think. You can see the very nice, I like this SEM a lot because not only I took this one, because mostly you can see the layered structure here. So they're thinner part and then gradually thicker part. And then we make this nano drum head. Of course, then we try to also make transistors and measure their properties. But quickly we found we're limited by that fabrication process, so we pretty much abandoned that nowadays. So we are using a new process. So the old process is showing on the left-hand side. So starting from a silicon oxide on silicon substrate, usually we, like the one shown in the previous slide, we exfoliate molybdenum and then we put down electrodes by doing this PMMA coating and electron beam lithography. And in this process, we later yield device like electrodes on top of the 2D material. Many people were doing this. We were doing that too. So this, you can see there's lithography and wet chemistry that will contaminate the structure. So we abandoned this. And also to yield suspended structure, this is much more challenging. Nowadays, we put down metallic electrodes first at the wafer scale, 4-inch wafer, 6-inch wafer at large scale fabrication facility. And then we dice the chips, and each student gets a number of chips, and then we align this molybdenum crystal harvested on a polymer stamp, and then we press the stamp under microscope with alignment. So where we want the device, we put the device there. Okay, so that's quite a different approach now we are taking. So this series of cartoons images show you can follow A, B, C, D, E, and F shows the process. And this is a real-time recording. Then I put it into image showing the process. You can see the pressing down of the stamp. And this is the forefront of the stamp. So it's coming down. So there's a structure like this, air gap. Then you are expecting the Newton ring. Actually, the Newton ring is a signature to tell you that your process is going well. And then after you fully engage the 2D crystal from the stamp, you sort of program the temperature so that the substrate will let go. The substrate will let go the stamp, but not the 2D material. So you remove the blue arrows showing the disengagement of the PDMS stamp. Okay, so these are the early generation of dry transfer. In this process, there is no wet chemistry. Everything's dry. And then we have very clean devices. Of course, we were curious if the devices are good, any good or not. And so we measured the device with a high resolution Exquisitely 4200 semiconductor parameter analyzer. You can see some of the devices are already very good switching devices, but some of them are not. For example, this one is before annealing, after thermal annealing. Before annealing, the on current is very low. So this dashed curve is actually this. But after annealing, we can see the on current increase dramatically. And then through a lot of trials, we found that the dry transfer combined with post thermal annealing can enable very good ohmic contact for those electrodes, because now the 2D material. So we have done very significant study, like many generations of devices. We can see that for all the devices, just by annealing at 200 degrees C or 350 degrees C, we can get very high performance out of the 2D transistors. So this work was published as a cover of JVSTB last year, and this year we actually made, using same method, made black phosphorus transistors that are covered by boron nitride layers to encapsulate, to prevent them from degradation. This was all, again, last month, just published as a cover of JVSTB. So we can do sensors with transistors. We already have transistors, but we know there's a fundamental, not only because doing mechanics or making moving parts are in the gene of this type of researchers, but also because we know that using mechanical modes and a resonant mode to sense or to do signal transduction has at least two fundamental advantages. One is when you do resonant sensing, you translate the physical disturbance into frequency variations, whereas frequency and time are the quantities that people can measure with the best precision. And we can measure no other physical quantity more precise than we can measure frequency and time. And second is, once we put the mechanical resonance in electrical or optical circuitry, we can build a clock-like system that will give us a capability to sense or transduce something in real time, which is not readily done usually in a transistor mode. Transistor electronic sensor, you really have to sweep the IV curve to figure out. So that's a slow measurement. So the first step to realize this big picture is to make resonators. Making resonators is not new practice. We just learned from all the pioneering work in MEMS and NEMS resonator field. So in here, to look at the 2D resonators, we first use that drum head structure and pump down to a moderate vacuum only. This is a poor guy's experimental setup. There's no ultra-high vacuum. There's no dilution fridge. And it's just a tabletop setup we made. But we were able to carefully engineer the spot size to be around 1 micrometer to be compatible with Raman measurement. And then we were able to demonstrate very, very good displacement sensitivity. Okay, so this is based on optical interferometry by using the light reflected from top surface of the 2D material and bottom surface of the cavity. Okay, so first generation devices you can see without driving, without shaking the device, we just park the laser onto the center. We're able to probe the Brownian motion fundamental mode vibration of this device at around 20 megahertz. With other devices, they're different size, and at around 15 megahertz. And the red dashed curves are this famous damped harmonic resonator equation. You can see it fits very well. It helps us to extract the quality factor. And then we worked out a mixed elasticity model that taking into account the transition regime from a plate to a membrane. If you are familiar with elasticity, you know that plate or disk operates quite differently than a membrane. The membrane frequency can be changed by frequency quite a lot, while in a disk, the thickness and Young's modulus play significant roles. Okay, so then we further did this experiment. We put devices with 1, 2, 3 layer, 1, 2, 3, 4 layer. The layer number was calibrated by their band gap photoluminescence measurement. And then we studied this. You can see this again, the ultra thin 1, 2, 3, 4 layer devices put in a previous mixed elasticity model. Fits very well the elasticity theory. Our devices show performance that surpass the best device reported based on graphene. And this work actually inspired some series to study the dissipation mechanism being molybdenum and probably better than in graphene. And this work was published, our work was published in this paper. And I'll quickly skip or do a trailer for you. There's another material, but also resonator work, which is based on black phosphorus. Black phosphorus is another semiconductor, but different than transition metal dicogonite. It's elemental. It's like graphene. It's a single element. It's not a compound. And if it fills this band gap, the gap in a band gap diagram between graphene and the transition metal dicogonite. And this material has a unique property in it's totally anisotropic and very strong intrinsic anisotropic properties in all domains: mechanical, optical, electrical, thermal. And then we use this device to build the first black phosphorus resonators. These measurements are actually routine for us. And what's interesting, we were able to pulse or apply trains of RF bursts to excite the device, the measured device in time domain. And we also were able to make tunable resonators based on this structure. Does this work? Okay, now we're gonna talk about two quickly examples of how do we use this platform to do physical sensing or translation between different physical quantity domains. The first one is displacement sensing. So we first actually take a 2D resonator that's not on atomic layer, but on a silicon carbide mechanical resonator. So we build something we call microspectroscopy. Basically, we park the laser at one point where we can read a wide multi-mode resonance of the structure. And second, we focus on one mode, but we're rastering the structure so that we can image the displacement locally. So this combination of microspectroscopy and spectral microscopy give us this interesting result. So if you park laser here at the middle or pedestal of the device, there's nothing. If you park here, we see 5 modes. If you park here, we see only 3 modes. So that's where actually the idea came from. So we use this methodology. We were able to image. So the left side of each panel was the experimental data. The right-hand side was simulation. So image to the ninth mode of mechanical resonance undriven thermomechanical mode. And with multi-mode as a sensing probe, we can actually trace back to see how much defects or fabrication imprecision is on a pedestal. So that's the sensing modality by using multi-mode. And we quickly turned that work into the 2D platform. We were able to image the mode shapes of circular, oval, different no-ideal structures that can help us tell how much no-ideality in geometry in this 2D drumhead mechanical structures. And then we use that geometry engineering to program multimode and program the multimode crossing in this type of structures. And this work is also published 2 years ago. The second case study, also go like flash quickly, is on the first study of using 2D NEMS resonators to probe gamma ray, and we demonstrate there's a potential to go for single or below single gamma ray photon detection. So this is an experimental setup. We were doing this gamma ray sensing in physics teaching lab, so the source was very safe. So you can see that that's a very low density source. Undergraduate physics students were able to hold the source by hand. So this is also relevant for early detection of any radiation pollution or gamma ray from radiation sources. So we first calibrate the radiation source by using conventional sodium iodide scintillator. So we calibrate the emission is at this energy. And then you can see this is the source. We put our vacuum chamber. During the transportation, everything, the device always in the same vacuum chamber. We never take it out. So we were able to do this experiment. And before the experiment, of course, we did some calculation to allow us to predict. So this is a pre-radiation signal of 4 resonators on the same chip. And then upon radiation, so we radiate this device because the density is very low. We radiate this device overnight for 24 hours. So you can see everyone, upon radiation, the frequency goes up dramatically, up to 2%. And then we calibrate, for example, one of all the device, but here showing one of the device. The device has this physical properties. The theoretical radiation sensitivity is 0.05 photon, and the photon responsivity is also very high. We're able to model the system to show that the gamma ray excites all sorts of charges. The charges got trapped in the semiconductor layer and also the silicon oxide layer underneath interface. So we were able to figure out, theoretically explain our measurement data nicely. So basically we demonstrate the gamma ray radiation responsivity 40 to 80 hertz per photon. This translates to about much less than 1 photon sensitivity. Okay, I have another example called pressure sensor, but I will skip that. Yes, I'm wrapping up. So if you're interested in this, you can talk to me. But basically, I hope the take-home message is this. You can just read the slide. And I thank my students for their strong contribution to all this effort. I thank the funding agency, especially the NEE award and the NSF award and the Graphene fellowship that are dedicated to the 2D studies here. With that, thank you so much for your attention.